That's one way to look at it. The head of the National Academy of Sciences said we're about to engage in this huge nutritional experiment, what you people are doing, and you've got the American subjects, the American public as the subjects, and then again, 30 years later, we've gotten sicker and sicker.
There's much more information about nutrition and not getting fat, and we're fatter.
And we're more diabetic. And what we want to do, one of the reasons we're here, that can be fixed. It can all be fixed with good science.
All right, well, good science. You have a book out called Good Calories, Bad Calories. But I watch TV, and I know that a calorie is a calorie. There's just no difference. What are you talking about?
The idea of a calorie is a calorie. It's like the reason you get fat is because you take in more energy than you expend, and the energy comes in the form of calories. It's a unit of heat. And each one of the nutrients you eat, protein, fat, the different types of carbohydrates, the glucose from starch or the glucose and fructose from sugar, they all have entirely different effects in your body. Some of them are metabolized in different organs. They stimulate secretion of hormones that have different effects on whether or not you will store calories as fat or burn them as fuel. And so there's always been this counter-argument that maybe it's not the calories, it's the hormonal effect of the foods on our body. What these foods do to us, not how much energy they bring to us.
But the U.S. Department of Health is saying a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. It's not government. They're stupid. They have an agenda.
It just hasn't been tested.
And it just hasn't been tested?
It just hasn't been tested rigorously. In fact, one of the things Gary and I did when we started this organization was went back and...
This organization being?
The Nutrition Science Initiative. We went back and we looked at every scientific study back to World War II that had at least attempted to answer that question. I think, Gary, we found about 82 studies that had attempted to answer that, but they were all fraught with the same sort of limitations and problems. And so in 2012, we actually don't know the answer to that question based on rigorous science, although there's actually plenty of anecdotal evidence to suggest that Gary's point might be correct and that a calorie is not a calorie.
And one thing I know that's absolutely must be true is that you should eat less fat. Fat does all this harm. And yet you eat lots of fat. And you're a doctor, a Stanford doctor. What's that about?
Well, like I said, about 3 or 4 years ago when I just got to the point where I was too overweight to handle my own existence and my wife said I needed to be a little less not thin, I realized that I probably had a carbohydrate intolerance issue and that all those whole grains and things that I was eating were probably leading to me becoming fatter. And I realized that if I stripped that stuff out of my diet and I ate more fat, believe it or not, all of the metabolic derangement that was underpinning my propensity to gain weight would go away. And lo and behold, it did.
You're not fat now by eating fat.
Yeah, so the question is what happened to Peter, and it happens to a lot of people anecdotally. They get rid of the carbohydrates in the diet, they add back fat instead, they lose weight. The question is that some kind of bizarre anecdotal event that just happened to Peter Attia because he's some weird Stanford-educated doctor, or is it common? Maybe the nutritional advice that we're all getting is wrong. Maybe the food guide pyramid, back in the 60s, it used to be believed that carbohydrates, the bread, pasta, potatoes, rice were inherently fattening. That's what our mothers believed.
Yeah, you have a picture of a piece of bread with butter in your book, and that's because...
The idea used to be that the butter was considered healthy and the bread was considered fattening. Then our government came along and decided that it was the butter that was fattening and the bread that we should all be eating, and then that coincides with an obesity epidemic.
And they also said margarine was bad for you. No, margarine was good for you at first. And then, trans fats, eggs were terrible, but now eggs are okay.
It's all based, and the reason for this flipping, flopping back and forth is because the kind of research we do to try and establish it isn't capable of sort of establishing a definitive result.
Why? Why don't we do this? It's important.
Well, it's really hard. You could use laboratory rats, for example. And it's really easy. You put the rat in a cage, you give it the chow, and it does what it does.
Or even a double-blind test with people.
Exactly. With drugs, for example, it's really easy. It's take this pill or take that pill. When you're studying nutrition, it's actually really hard. You send people home with a diet book and say, John, I want you to follow this diet, come back in 2 years, and it's hard to do. So we really can't measure what we think we're measuring, and it's probably a result of this, as opposed to some sort of gross incompetence that's led to this ambiguity.
Well, thank you, Peter Attia and Gary Taubes. Coming up, did you know that the coming budget cuts will kill you? You're going to die of food